course, I'd like to thank you for being here with us and giving me this
Absolutely.
talk. And I've asked Hugo, who knows you very well, and who knows your work, of course, very well, to shortly say something
Sure.
at the start of your talk.
Sure. It'll be very short. Because in fact, Clancy Clements is a long-term friend of Center for Linguistics and of many of us here, especially those who work on language context, which is one of his fortes, but not the only one in his research. So Professor Clements has been working in several institutions. The one that's which was the last one and the one that you're mostly associated with is Indiana University, but he also worked in the University of New Mexico. And a few of the places I recently learned from him that he taught here in Lisbon for a while, right? A few years ago in a language school, right?
No, I never did. You must be mistaken. That I remember? No. But
I thought you said you'd been there in that school.
to the in Seattle. Oh, I taught English as a second language or as a foreign language. Yeah, Seattle. Yes. Sorry. Yes, way back that was in the 1981, 82.
So as you can see,
So a while ago.
visitor to Lisbon.
Yeah.
And it's a pleasure to have him now with us again. I'll tell you a little bit more about the context in which Clancy is here with us today. But let me just mention, for those of you who are not familiar with his work, that one of the areas that his research has been mostly focusing on is Portuguese in contact in general terms, but also Spanish in contact. And when it comes to Portuguese in contact, what motivates the topic that he brings today is his long-term work on the Indo-Portuguese creoles of India, in particular that of Corlai, of which he's written a full grammar, the reference grammar for that very specific, very small and endangered variety spoken in a small village south of Bombay. But also, he's also done work on Daman Creole. And that is the reason why we are now collaborating in a new project that you can see here, Oral Corpus of the Indo-Portuguese Creoles of Daman Indo. This is an exploratory project that has just started here at CLUL. And the team is made up of both of us and Pedro Jordão, an MA student who's back there. So this is one of those few occasions in which the team is going to be together, right? And Clancy has come over this week for a full week of introductory workshops to make all sorts of decisions about how the corpus is going to be built and going to be made available. So we're very happy to have him here. But in addition to the work on Indo-Portuguese creoles, I should also mention, because it's also perhaps interesting for many of us here at CLUL, that Clancy has also done a lot of research about second language acquisition, in particular when it comes to Spanish among migrant communities. And more recently, he's also done work about Barranqueño, which is closer to us here. Yeah. So that's it, I'll give you the floor. As you can see, today we're going to be hearing about the creoles of Daman Indo, which, as I've just mentioned, are the focuses of our new project. So in a way, Clancy's talk, in addition to everything else, also doubles as a public presentation of this new project of CLUL. And I'm very, very happy that you're here with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I want to start by thanking Hugo for bringing me here. It's great to work with him. It's easier to work with someone in order to get something done. And all the stuff, I have like a lot of material on Daman, but if I hadn't asked Hugo and now Pedro to help, I probably wouldn't have gotten it done. Now, within probably 3 or 4 years, it'll get done. And I'm really happy about that. So I wanted to thank him for that, and just thank the chair for housing us. We're in the Linguistics Center of the University of Lisboa. And what I'm going to talk about is Daman and Diu, and you'll see that they're very interesting. And if you know anything about creoles, these northern Indo-Portuguese creoles are really, really different. So let's start. Get right into it. I'll give a brief historical background of Asian Portuguese creoles, very brief, and then one linguistic feature shared by all, so you can see why they're considered, linguistically at least, they're considered a group. And then I'll focus in on Daman and Diu, looking at some of the historical notes on these two areas, and I'll be pointing out what they share in common. There are plenty of things they don't share in common, but there are plenty of things they do share. So I'll be looking at that. Then one thing in particular that these northern Indo-Portuguese creoles have, they have retained morphology from Portuguese, and you hardly ever see that. And the reason, and so I'll be going over that, and then there's another thing that is going on, and this takes us into borrowing. So these Creole languages have been living for 500 years together with these regional languages, like in this case Gujarati. And so have they been influenced? Well, yes. Well, how? Well, we'll see one example of that, and why that example is remarkable in itself. So, brief historical notes. So way back when Spain was Castile and Portugal was Portugal, in 1493, the Pope at that time said, well, I can divide the world up, that's okay, and made a division that everything west of that line in the Treaty of Tordesillas, that's that is Spain's, and everything on this side to the east is Portugal's. But then in 1523, another line was made on the other side of the globe, and they said, well, up until here, then it's Portuguese, and then after that, it's Spanish. So it's very interesting that in the 16th century or 15th century, they thought they could carve up the world. It's very, but there it is. You have that going on. So the Portuguese, if you think about it, within 130 years, they colonized all this in 130 years. Just, it boggles my mind anyway. So they went to South America using the trade winds. They came down, clear over to India. From India, they went up and then around to Sri Lanka, then over to Malaysia, Indonesia, and so forth. And then up to Canton, where Macau is today. So just an amazing amount of exploration in that time. So I'll be focusing on this area. And so they arrived here in 1498, and then they went up, and by 1510 they were in Goa. By 1505 they were in Chao, Cordlai area. And by 1524 they already had a sizable fort built. And I've been in the fort. The fort still stands today. It's not a ruins. It still stands. The outside walls are still intact and so forth. It's an amazing structure. And that by 1524 they had already built that. Then in 1535 they settled Diu, but it took them a little longer to settle Daman because the Sultanate of Surat showed a lot of resistance. And so it took him till 1581 till Daman was considered part of the Portuguese Empire, city of the empire. So let me see. What's interesting and very telling about the difference between northern Indo-Portuguese Creoles in the south is that they had different substrates. And for the north, you could say also adstrates. Those are all Indian, Indo-Aryan languages. Down here you have Dravidian languages. And further east you have Malaysia, Indonesia, and other languages. So in the Philippines, you have Tagalog and a lot of the other Austronesian languages, and then Chinese. So is there a shared feature that all these Asian Creoles have? And it turns out there are various shared features, but there's a question word. So kilaya, which in what manner in Portuguese? Today, I don't think you guys say that these days, right? It's an antiquated form. But you don't find it in any African-based Portuguese Creole. You find it in almost all of the Asian Creoles. So there is a commonality in all the Asian Creoles. In Cordlai, for example, you say Kile, in Daman, Kilai, but you also have Com, and that's because of the influence of Portuguese. So in Diu, you have Com, you don't have Kile. Why? Well, the Portuguese influence was particularly strong, and also the education level was higher, and I'll talk about that in a while. So in Norteiro, so in the Mumbai area, you had Kile. In Malabar Coast, Kile, then Batikaloa, Kile Kristang, in Malaysia, Kile, Batavia, which has died out, but the grammar we have shows that you have this Kilaya, and also in Philippine Creole Spanish you have it, which is thought by some to be, initially at least, it was a Portuguese Creole that relexified. So there are common features that all these Asian Portuguese Creoles share. That is one of them that is really telling, because why a question word? Well, it's like, it's not a noun, it's not a verb, it's a question. So now focusing on Daman and Diu, a little bit of history there. So here is the Daman area, the bigger area. The place that you see here is where the Christian community, and when I say Christian, I mean Catholic, Roman Catholic. So you have Nani Daman, which is small Daman. You have Moti Daman, which is big Daman there. And then there are areas here, you can see it better if you look at this map. Here, so most of the acrolectal speakers live here. Most of the basilectal speakers live here. This is where the government is. And you have churches in a number of places, and these are really big and old churches. They're pretty cool. So in the 19th or the 20th century, I could go back further, but there was an increase little by little in the population. And so from the 19th century to the 1990s, there's an increase of about 1,000 souls. The majority of the population is in Big Daman, so south of that river, the Big Daman and Badrapur, and the Small Daman has the minority. So Big Daman has about 2,500 to 3,000 speakers. Small Daman, 1,000 to 1,500 speakers. These days, a lot of these people live in diasporic communities. In the UK, for example, in Leicester, there's a huge community of Daman Creole speakers. How did they do that? Well, they were Portuguese citizens. They still are Portuguese citizens. They have Portuguese passports. And so before Brexit, of course, they all know English because they're educated in English, and also the church uses English mostly. And so they came to Portugal, and then went to the UK and settled in the UK. So if you look at what's going on with the language use, Daman Indo-Portuguese Creole, like a lot of Creoles, but in particular these, they're used among the Christian community. It's a tight-knit community. There are essentially two different registers. In Badrapur, you have the more basilective form. The more acrolective form is used in small Daman. Then there is a social stratification in Daman. It's a big enough community where you can have social stratification. And then the type of employment, the level of education will dictate where one lives and also what one speaks. So what's interesting in this is that they identify, there's a significant link, and it has to do with identity, between their language, the Portuguese heritage that they have, and the Catholic faith, right? So if we look at an overview, there is a contact language. They have their Gujarati and English starting in the end of the 19th century. Portuguese in government was very strong until the second half of the 19th century, and then it diminished somewhat. The cultural presence started diminishing after 1961 when the Indian government took over these areas and started, they governed them from the federal, from the national, from New Delhi. And then education, you have white collar workers that live more in the small Daman, and then tradespeople and other blue collar workers that live in Badrapur. So that's Daman. Diu is quite different. It looks like it's a little island, but that's actually a river that separates what looks like an island from the mainland. Here you have Diu City, St. Paul's Church. Here you have the Portuguese fort, which is also still intact. They built things to last way back when they built. So notice from the end of the 18th century down to the 20th century, and this is because from Hugo's work. He published a book on Diu, which is the reference grammar of Diu Indo-Portuguese in 2009. And you can tell that the little by little, the population has decreased. And a lot of people emigrate to other places, and it's decreased. By 1991, there were about 250 people. So overall, it's spoken, Diu Indo-Portuguese is spoken in the Diu town. It's an in-group language as of the early 2000s, or it's probably got less than 250 speakers. Hugo can probably talk about that. Diu has minimal social stratification. And this has to do with the fact that it's such a small community. And they basically all tend to have white collar jobs. So as in Daman, in Diu, there's also a significant link between the Portuguese heritage, their religion, and their language. So there's an identity thing going on there. So again, the overview is languages in contact are the same. The presence of Portuguese is basically the same as in Daman. What is different is this. that you have a bigger population in Daman, they're more socially stratified, and not, which is not the case in Diu. Okay, so what do they share, those two communities? Well, they share quite a bit. And this is, so I won't focus on the differences here, I'll focus on the similarities. So they are geographically close, they share the same substrate, both Gujarati, they're all Roman Catholics. They are influenced by English in the same way and also from the same time period. Then the employment, we talked about that in terms of employment. Daman, since it's a bigger community, they have more people, and they need people to go work there. Yeah, so there are a lot of Daman Indo-Portuguese Creole speakers that go work in Diu. Not the same the other way around, and it's a population issue, right? In my case, I knew the assistant that helped me transcribe all the stories. Her husband was a police officer, and he was recruited to go to Diu and work. He worked there several years, and that is pretty common. Okay, so the bottom line, they have a history together. They know of one another. There is intermarriage, and that's a biggie. Then you have, they both have the same political status. They're ruled as federal territories from New Delhi, and in both cases, the communities they identify with their language, which is also part of their faith, which is also part of their culture. Okay, so do you see some of this commonality in the language? And I will, of course, I'm going to say, yeah, of course you do. And I'll show you why and why. Now, I can't talk about why you don't find it in other places, but you do find it here. So what they have is, as you all know, Portuguese has 3 verb classes. The A class, E class, E class. Yeah. So cantar, beber, subir. Yeah. In no other Creole is that maintained, especially the allomorphy, except where? Well, in the northern Indo-Portuguese Creoles. Yeah. So I'll be talking about that. I'll be talking about past tense regular morphology. I'll talk about that. And then I'll talk about irregular past tense morphology. And then I'll go and talk about the shared borrowing that they have. So the retained morphology of verb classes, well, it's the ones that you know and love, probably. So you have in Daman, falar, beber, dormir, but in Diu, what they've done, normally the base form in Daman, the base form is what we consider the infinitive in Portuguese. Not so in the case of Diu. In Diu, they have 2 forms. They have the form falar, but the form in present tense, they use the third person singular form for everything. So first, second, third, singular, plural, it's all say fal if it's speak, babe if it's drink. And that's very interesting, but why the third singular? So we often, when we learn these languages that have a lot of conjugations, we learn first the forms we hear the most. And the third person singular is the one that is used a lot. It's also the imperative, yeah, the familiar imperative. So that's one reason there. So you have regular past tense morphology. This is what you don't find in Creoles usually, actually hardly ever. And so you said, falou, bebeu, notice it's not bebo. They have not conflated the different allomorphs of the past. They've kept that. Dormiu, bebeu. And what Daman has done, which is interesting, they added a 4th class. they took an invariant form from Gujarati to be able to borrow verbs. So they have the U class. Baburu is, to me, in this case, it means grumble. They only have 2 of those. Korlai has 60 or 70. Yeah, well, also Korlai is a different animal. We can't talk about that. But anyway, you have falo, bebel, dormil, very, very, and it's part and parcel. It's not that some people say it, some people don't. No, this is part and parcel of the language. Okay, I'm gonna, this is a parentheses, and this is a typological parentheses, and it has to do with substrates. And then I'll resume what I was talking about. So the regular past tense morphology, what I said is, well, you find it in these northern Indo-Portuguese creoles, but you don't find it anywhere else. You don't find it in the Malabar coast, Sri Lanka, you don't find it in Papua Cristana, you don't find it in Makita. Well, why? Well, one reason might be that you have different substrates. So the substrates here are Indo-Aryan. Romance languages, apart from French, Romance languages are really fusional languages with complicated conjugational systems. Well, and Indo-European. The Indo-Aryan languages as well. They're highly fusional. They have complicated suffixal verbal morphology. So these people who are learning Portuguese, they're very aware of verbal endings. Yeah, and there are only 2 languages in contact, the regional languages and Portuguese. So it makes sense that they might retain some of these verbal endings. In the case of Malabar Coast, Sri Lanka, and these are agglutinative languages or isolating languages, really different. And none of them retain any of what I'm talking about. So it's very interesting. So the parentheses is over. I'll go back and talk about this. So you have irregular past morphology. So Diu, Daman, you have like fez, foi, ve. And Daman, you have fez. You have ja foi. That ja is from already, which I'm sure you know. And what that did is it lexicalized as its own form, ja foi. And also jayo, which is another form, but I don't need to talk about that. So now, here's where we take a right turn and go into not what is retained, but what they borrowed, okay? I don't know if any of you have read about borrowing constraints. In historical linguistics, they talk about borrowing constraints as, oh, there are certain things you can't borrow. And it's like, well, yes, maybe, maybe not. So what I'm going to do is, here's the phenomenon that we're talking about. Both Daman and Diu Indo-Portuguese are prepositional languages. Yeah, not a problem, not a problem. Both Daman and Diu Indo-Portuguese have 1 postposition. And it's junt. And it's not with your normal, so in Portuguese, it's to get, estamos juntos, yeah, and junto de, yeah, you could say near something, yeah. But here it means with, yeah. So that's very, very interesting, both in Diu, junt, and in Daman. Okay, so Cardoso, regarding Diu Indo-Portuguese, he says, one adposition sometimes contradicts a canonical preposition plus NP order. Junt is a comitative and sometimes occurs in this construction. What I've never asked him this, but I'm going to interpret what he might mean. is that it's variable. You might get junt as a preposition. You might get it as a postposition. Okay, is that true? Yeah. Okay. So in Daman, really a bit different. Okay. So here's an example from Cardoso's published work. Min junt não tem muito dinheiro. That means with me there is not money. That's how they say I have no money. They don't have, in these Indo-Aryan languages, they don't have the word have. So if you say I have a cold, it's like to me, cold there is. That's the way you say it, that kind of thing. I have money, near me, I have money, that kind of. So it's a little bit different. So in Daman Indo-Portuguese, the distribution is really nicely predictable, and it's really strange. If you know languages, you probably have not seen this. Here, the data that I have are from 3 sources: from Delgado, from the beginning of the 20th century, then from stories that I collected in the early 2000s, 100 years later, and then the data collection task, which I'll talk about. So Delgado says that you find in Daman Portuguese comigo sometimes, but mostly you find like min junt, dos junt, with you, with me. Those are more commonly found. So the postpositional phrase is based on Gujarati, which is, so Gujarati you have sate, mari sate, it's my with. So the postpositions in a lot of the Indo-Aryan languages, they govern the genitive. So it's always the genitive. It's never the in the Romance languages, for example, it's an oblique or an object form. But in these languages, it's a genitive. So in narratives that I collected, it's the same. You know, you have junt. And this is what's interesting. Junt appears with postposition, always with pronouns. And if it's a full MP, it's always a preposition. Always. So it's like this. So if you have min junt, dos junt, do say junt, this is like with him, with me, with you, with you. They even have the formal familiar. You know, that is not very often kept. And the reason, again, in Indo-Aryan languages, they have those forms. But that's another topic. I'm sorry, I'm getting off that. So notice you have junt Paulo. It's not Paulo de junt Paulo, or Paulo de junt. No, it's junt Paulo merci. So that's what you find. Okay, so the elicitation task, I had 2 questions. I had this person who was so patiently assisted me in transcribing these stories that I recorded from various of the speakers, and I asked her if any of the other prepositions can be used as postpositions, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I also asked the question, and this is, why junt appears as a postposition? Why not anything else? It's only junt. Okay, and I'll take the second question first. So why is that? Yeah, that's the question. And the answer, I have no idea. I really don't. It's a mystery. It's a mystery. And one hypothesis that I had would be that you have some sounds correspondences. But with me, like min sate or mari sate, there's no sound correspondence there. You have some sound correspondence if you look at postpositions in Gujarati, like bajumam is one, najika is another. One means beside, the other means near. Both elements share a ja, but they don't share the same meaning. So this is a question that remains. If somebody wants to go there and figure it out, boy, go there. Yeah. Okay. The other question, apart from junt, is it possible that you have other Daman Indo-Portuguese creoles used as postposition? And I see they don't. No other preposition appears as a postposition. And so I wanted to know, and I did an elicitation task about, can others also be used like junt? And the answer is yes. Yes, they can. I looked at all these compound prepositions. I took these and I put them in the first person singular because mean junt is, that is what most commonly comes in the stories. So I asked, can you say this? I asked the assistant, she's a native speaker, ante me, me ant, bash the me bash, and so forth and so on. She said, all these are just fine. They're just fine. So that blew me away. I didn't expect that. I expected, but she said, yeah, they're good. They're good. So why is this important? And this is the last part, and I won't go over it by too much. This is the last part. Why is it it is important because this is a clear and evident counterexample to the constraint on borrowing that has been proposed. Many people, going back to Moravchik and also King, they propose, oh, you have to have certain situation in order to borrow. And basically it's this. She proposes a direct borrowing of a grammatical feature from a source language such that the post placement of an adposition in an otherwise prepositional language cannot take place directly, but rather can only take place after a lexical item with the relevant syntactic properties is borrowed. So that means you can't borrow a structure if you haven't borrowed the lexical item that has that structure. That's what it said. And she looked at Prince Edward Island French. And I'm sure that constraint is fine in Prince Edward Island French. It's not, it doesn't work here. This is another, I've already said that, so I'll go. So the existence of the postpositions junt is a counterexample, and this begs the question in Daman and Diu, why are there no borrowed postpositions? And this is, there are none. There are none. In all the Delgado stories, in all the stories that I collected, in all the stuff, I at that time I spoke it as probably a mid-intermediate speaker of Daman Portuguese. I heard none. I heard none. So there's no shining crystal clear answer why. I wish I had one, but there is no good answer. The hypotheses that I've come up with have to do with identity. So the nature of Daman and Diu Indo-Portuguese, they're in-group languages, and they have served as a reason for their speakers to borrow maybe nouns and very few verbs, but not functional elements. You know, there's no need. And also, it's an in-group language. It's like a secret language. It's like a language that makes us, we have a boundary between the outside world, the majority, and our Catholic minority with Portuguese heritage. So the presence of Portuguese and the attachment of Daman and Diu speakers to this cultural and linguistic identity may have served as a barrier. That's possible. I have no way of proving that, but that's my hypothesis. Okay, so what is clear, and that's this, I'll end with this, the social historical conditions that seem to have played an important role in Daman and Diu Indo-Portuguese, they allowed a structure into their language without adopting a lexical item with that structure. This supports what Thomason and Kaufman have said, which is very interesting and telling, that social factors determine the nature and the extent of what is borrowed, not linguistic ones. Okay? So, conclusions. the Asian Portuguese Creoles, you can find features that they all share and are not shared by other Portuguese Creoles. Among the Asian Portuguese Creoles, there is a clear difference between the northern Indo-Portuguese Creoles and the rest, and that's because of all the verbal morphology, as now you know. Particularly in Daman and Diu, there is they share verb class morphology, including past tense, regular and irregular morphology. Due to their shared history, Daman and Diu also share the fact that both have borrowed a structural feature, which is a clear counterexample, and it shows that, as I said just now, that social factors may play a more important role than linguistic factors in borrowing. Okay, so thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.